What if I think I'm funny, but my wife doesn't?
Well, that's universal. Your cat doesn't think you're funny either.
It's universal.
My cat has zero taste. I won't say that about my wife because she married me, but I'm pretty sure I'm funny.
I just took that, by the way, as meaning it's universal. Nobody thinks you're funny.
Welcome to the Two Authors Podcast, an entertaining chat show hosted by best-selling mystery and thriller authors Douglas Pratt and Nicholas Harvey, in lively, humorous and informative conversation with distinguished guests who share their thoughts and experience about forging a successful author career.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Hope everyone's doing great. How are you, Mr. Nick?
I'm grand. Merry post-Christmas when this comes out. We're recording it pre-Christmas, but it comes out post-Christmas. So happy January.
And then New Year's sometime too, yeah.
New Year. Happy New Year. It's 2025. I just said it. It's 2025. What the? How did it become 2025? Seriously.
I know, man. Isn't that crazy? Like, it's just like, I swear it's just like 2000.
I know. Aren't our computers all going to switch off because it's a change of century, 2000? And no, nothing happened.
But hey, we digress. Today we have an awesome guest. Like, we're going to have, this one is a doctor, like an actual doctor. And then we're talking about D.P. Lyle, who's a renowned author and co-creator of the Outliers Writing University, which we're going to talk about. It's a platform that is dedicated to helping teach craft of writing and storytelling. And so he's going to be a lot of fun to talk to, I think. Get a lot of information from him. But before we get started, I have a question for you. This one comes from Miss Angela Kelly from Ocala, Florida. She asks, what do you hope readers take away from your thrillers beyond just enjoying a great story? Like, do you want to have a particular feeling, a theme, a message you're aiming to leave with them?
Yes, I want them to buy the next one.
That was my answer.
Well, that's the truth. We do this for a living, so it's really important that they're excited to buy the next one. No, but yeah, I definitely have that in mind. There's parts of the stories and certain things in certain books that I want to produce an emotion. That's important because that's what I enjoy. I enjoy watching a show or reading a book that makes me feel things, and it's important what you feel. I think too. I think the biggest problem I have with so many TV shows that are being produced now is I do not give a freaking shit about anybody for the first 3 episodes. And you've lost me. If you can't, people say, oh no, you got to stick with it. It gets great. No, screw you. I'm not sticking with it. Why should I stick with it? You've had 3 episodes to get me emotionally attached to anybody here, anybody. And I don't give a shit about anyone. I know this, what's it called? The Australian show that's about the ranchers and with the big ranchers. It's kind of like the Yellowstone set in Australia. And everyone's been raving about it. And I watched the first episode and got to the end of it and went, don't care. Nobody had any likable aspect to them that I was like, I'd like to see what happens to that person.
Kind of felt that way about Yellowstone, but that was just me. I'm like one of the few.
I honestly had to have 2 bites of the apple of Yellowstone. After watching the first episode, I think I watched 1.5, 2 episodes the first time around. And I was like, I really don't care. Everyone's just going nuts about it. And I went back and it was a slow burn and it took longer to get in. And I'd say that's the biggest fault of that show is the beginning. It doesn't give you anything to hang your hat on until you're in a couple of 2 or 3 episodes. And then you're hooked.
I've got to finish the series because I'm down to the last season that just came out. But overall, other than Beth and Rip, the rest of the people, I think the storylines are pretty weak.
I think it faded along the way, but it peaked early on when it got into that first season. But I had that series very much in mind, actually, when I was watching this other one.
My own thing is it's very similar to that. I think it's all about trying to, I want the reader to have a great story, but I want them to feel like they're invested in the characters. I want them to really, really want the best. Because I'm like you. I don't like characters where I feel like, I don't care about them one way or the other. And then I make that decision pretty quick. Like, you can tell, I don't like that character. There's no redeeming quality to him. So I feel that that's the big part I'm looking for too. So
key in a series. We write series, so if you're going to write a series, your protagonist, baby, that's
your character better be nice, and they better like them. So let's get on, because this week we have, again, like I said a minute ago, an actual doctor, smarter than we are.
Everybody's smarter than we are.
Isn't a challenge at all. But DP Lyle, he's MD, which he's a cardiologist, so already, like I said, better than us. But he's Amazon #1 best-selling author. He's won more awards than we could shake a stick at. I mean, but just so I can shake it a little bit, it's like the McCavity, the Benjamin Franklin Silver Award, the Edgar, the Seamus, the Agatha, the Anthony, the Scribe, the Silver Falchion. He's also got the USA Today Best Books Award. So he's kind of like a legit thing. So I hope you feel a little bit
intimidated,
overwhelmed and intimidated, Nick.
I'm thoroughly intimidated.
Welcome to the show, Doug. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we have a plethora of Dougs, a murder of Dougs. I think it should be a murder of Dougs, like crows.
A murder of Dougs. I want to do a council of Dougs. I think that'd be kind of cool. We could get
a council of Dougs.
A council, exactly. I like that.
Get a couple of us together. We'd be very wise, I think. So
yes. Well, maybe not.
Councils in England are rarely wise.
Yes,
so.
exactly.
Don't ask my wife. She'd be like, "No, I don't need more than one of y'all." So.
They're like committees. They only come to the right decision by accident.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Doug, kind of just get started. Kind of give us a little brief synopsis, the quick rundown about how you kind of got started into writing, a little bit of your history, so we can fill it in for the audience.
Well, I grew up in the South, and in the South, if you can't tell a story, they won't feed you. So, they put you out behind a barn and just let you, wither away and let the pigs eat you, But so I could always tell a story. Everybody I knew could tell a story, could spin a yarn, but I wasn't sure I could write it. And I always said, well, when I retire, I got these stories I want to see if I can write. But about 25 years ago or so, I said, well, retirement's not on the horizon anytime soon. So if not now, when? So I took some classes at University of California, Irvine in their extension program, a couple of classes, joined a couple of writers groups and just started writing. And I found out that spinning a yarn is a lot easier, at least for me, than writing one. It's a different animal. But, you just muddle through. And, my first book took 2.5 years and it was garbage. And, of course, 10 years later, it got all fixed and published. But, yeah, you just learn. You learn by doing and you learn by reading. And I've always been an avid reader, And I think to be a writer, you have to read, and you have to read in a lot of different genres. You're
a medical doctor as well. So, I think my mother would have preferred me to go from author to medical doctor, not medical doctor to author. So, I mean, obviously, what's the challenge with making that jump?
People always say, well, how do you find the time to do all this? And I don't sleep much, and I've never needed more than 5 or 6 hours of sleep ever my entire life. Used to drive my parents crazy when I was a kid because I'd be up terrorizing the neighborhood at 4:30 in the morning, and I'm still that way. I wake up early, I get up early, I get to work, and I stay up late at night. So if you got a lot of hours to deal with, you got time to do all that stuff. But when I was practicing full time, which is an 80-hour-a-week job, and then try to find time to write. It was challenging. But again, I considered sitting down in front of the computer and playing with my imaginary friends fun time. So, that's.
And you've obviously you've done your own writing, and now you've branched out more. You've done a lot of connections between using your medical background and the writing world and connecting the two. Talk about that a little bit. Maybe talk about Outliers.
First of all, I wrote several books on forensic science for writers, like Forensics for Dummies, probably the most known one. But it's to kind of, give back to writers and tell them what they want to know about forensic science, because it involves all kinds of stories. Also, international thriller writers, myself and Kathleen Antrim, my good friend of forever, we were both founding members of International Thriller Writers, and Kathy ran a Thriller Fest, and pretty much the president sat on the board. We both did for a long time. And then I created and ran all of their educational programs, Craft Fest, Master Craft Fest, Online Thriller School, and all that. Well, a couple of years ago, we kind of walked away from all that because it was a lot of work after a decade and a half. But then about a year ago, we decided, we miss teaching. So we developed Outliers. And what it is the school, 2 classes a month, every month, month after month, forever. It's an ongoing online school. It's done over Zoom, and we have some great best-selling author teachers that are working authors, and that's the key. They're not academics. They work, they write, they produce. And so we get those people to teach classes, and we know who they are because we've known them for 20 years and through ITW and through the writing community. And so we just established this Outliers Writing University to teach the next generation of writers. It's very selfish because I want to read their books.
So I got to ask you this. So as an expert in the in the forensics field, what is the single biggest mistake authors tend to make when it comes to forensics?
In the dummies book, there's a thing they call parts of 10 or something in the back, and one of them is the biggest mistakes that people make. And, it's like the one-punch knockout, unless you're Mike Tyson, that ain't going to happen. You're just going to make somebody mad if you hit them in the face because you're not going to knock them out. You don't know how. The clean kill, you shoot somebody and they drop and they're dead, especially with a knife. That's not going to happen. The poisons with timers. People always want to get poison. Tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. will kill someone instantly. Well, it doesn't work that way. And they knock somebody out and they put them in the trunk of the car and they drive for 2 hours and they throw water on them and wake them up. No. If you do knock someone out with a 2x4, they're going to be out a couple of minutes, and then they're going to be woozy for a few minutes, and then they're going to be angry. So you better have another 2x4. Okay. So if somebody's out for more than 15 minutes from a blow to the head, there's something serious going on most times. It's not just a concussion.
I had this experience where my heart stopped for 30 seconds. I happened to be in a hospital at the time, and they made it stop unintentionally. But when I woke up, believe me, there wasn't an ounce of superhero in me. I was curled up in a fetal position. It felt like I was about to throw up at any second. The world was spinning. And I mean, that lasted for a long time. There was I barely walked out of the place an hour later.
Nick, how much superhero do you have in you right now?
Very little. Yeah. In the best of times, I have very little superhero.
I was going to say, I'm not going to be jumping up and doing it either, but there's no superhero.
But that's why we read books.
That's right. Yeah. I have a lot of frozen pizzas left in me that keep me from doing that kind of thing. So.
I like the through and throughs. Oh, it's just a through and through. You're okay. You still got shot. You got a bloody hole through you. It hit other stuff. There's
also a pain tolerance that certain people have, My dad drove himself to the hospital. He shoved a nail all the way through his hand, so it stuck, it didn't even break all the way through, but it stuck all the way through. And he just and he drove himself half an hour to the hospital. So I was like, well, I'd have been crying, going, oh no, I can't do that one. So, so you've also done a few of the media tie-in. I know you wrote some novels for the Royal Pains, and you've done a lot of stuff with some TV shows and stuff. I mean, can you talk to us a little about the process behind that? Because I know we've got a lot of people who asked about how do I break into that kind of world, and
it's not easy, and it literally is through people I've met, people like Matt Whitten and Lee Goldberg and Paul Guyo and Aaron Aronson and just different people that you meet in the writing community, and they write screenplays, and then they have questions for you. And so I would only work with the writers. I've been on movie sets before, shoot me now. It's just incredibly boring and a lot of wasted time, and I'm not a waste time guy. And so you sit around, and finally they get 45 seconds of screen time, after 3 hours of work. And it's this doesn't pencil out for me. But working with the writers, different animal, because screenwriters are very creative. They have to be, because they have such an economy of time and space to get this thing done and to have the movie actually be filmable. And so the dialogue and but they would have questions about medical stuff and forensic stuff and, like House and Monk and CSI Miami. There's different shows I worked with, but they had questions about stuff. How does this work? And does this make sense? And does this bit of dialogue sound correct? And things like that. So I would help with that.
So I have a question for you. I just wrote an article actually for Crime Writers, because I write there's a lot of scuba diving and in my book, so there's some technical aspects of it. And obviously in forensics and a doctor background, even in a novel, you have to balance that tech talk, language, and information with keeping it in the story and not turning your book into a textbook. So how do you balance that, and how do you teach a lot of people? So how do you teach people to balance that?
It is tricky, and you don't want a big data dump. And you want to give the reader enough that they understand what you're talking about, but not so much that it becomes boring in a textbook. And so the sweet spot's somewhere in between. My bias is always less is better. I'd rather have the reader questioning what's going on than being bored with what's going on. So if that, and let the context thing, it's kind of like when I tell people, when you're writing about setting, don't spend 2 paragraphs describing the room. Give the 2 or 3 telling details that gives someone the feel for the room. Let the reader build the room in their own mind. And I think that can be said for technical stuff too. Give them enough that they get a flavor for it, but they don't need to know all the physiology of how things work.
I think the tricky bit is, and again, it's the balance, right, is because you've got to be technically correct. And sometimes technically correct means saying a little bit more, and making that in concise is tricky. I find, drip feeding it can help as well. So you're not doing it in one whole paragraph, right?
Tell the reader what they need to know at that time. And that's it. And I think that's true of all writing. Don't spend an hour discussing something that's not going to happen for another 100 pages. Tell us when it happens.
So let me back you up a second to when you talked about dialogue. I'm just curious, like, one of the things, I love dialogue, so I think I can use dialogue. I use dialogue sometimes for what would be an info dump, like, if I'm trying to give some backstory, that kind of thing. So, but what do you think? I'd like to discuss kind of the role you think of dialogue in character development and how you would craft and make it authentic conversations. I mean, I just watched the old last night that was M. Night Shyamalan's movie, which I think had some of the worst dialogue I've ever seen in a movie. And I hope he's not listening. I'll assume he's not, but if he is, write better dialogue. But what do you think about like that as far as dialogue goes and how you can craft it to make it more authentic? So
if it wasn't for dialogue, I wouldn't be a writer, because that's my strength. And all of my books are heavy dialogue. I don't think there's any other tool that we use in writing more effective in showing character, moving the story forward, setting up the twists and turns, anything than dialogue, because it tells you everything about the speaker, the listener, and the circumstance, and it does it very compactly with a lot of white space. So it's easy to read, and readers will read it fast. If they see 3 pages of narrative, they skim it. The Elmore Leonard thing, leave out the parts people skip. And so dialogue is very effective. That I am very good with dialogue, and the dialogue is not real speech. It's writing speech. It's a different animal. But what I have trouble with in my writing is what I call set decoration. What people are doing while they're talking. How many times can you scratch your nose, and how many times can you take a sip of coffee? I have trouble with all of that other stuff, the stage directions, what people are doing when this dialogue is going on. And so I will write a book. I write fast. I'm a pantser. I just start writing and see where it goes. But probably I end up with my first draft being about 70,000 words, maybe even 65. And it's probably 90% dialogue. And then I go back in my first rewrite and I actually start fleshing out the story with all the other things that people need to know to understand what's going on. And then after that, a couple of run-throughs to clean everything up, and then I'm done. But I write fast and I write dialogue. Everything's dialogue-centric.
If I had to guess, as a cardiologist, a studious person, right, who has to get precision and everything right, I would have guessed you to be a plotter, and yet you're a pantser. That's very interesting to me.
Essentially, I plotted my first few books, and I did that. And what I would find is I would spend 3 weeks getting the plot outline, and I'd get about 70% through it and be bored. And then it turned out, and then I'd say, well, I don't want to write this now because I already done it. I already know the story. And there's no magic left. What am I doing? And then I'd start writing, and it became a drudgery. And then I found out that I changed it anyway. So finally, when I started my Jake Longley series, he's a comedic, they're comedic stories. He's a doofus ex-baseball player who gets drug in by his PI father into stuff all the time. And Jake is a doofus and a slacker, and he didn't want anything to do with any of this stuff. So I had an idea for a scene, and that was it. I had one scene in mind. And I said, don't overthink this. Let's just sit down and write this scene, and let's just go with the fun of it and see what happens. So I wrote that scene. Oh, and then I wrote that scene. Oh, and then I wrote that. Next thing you know, I'm 30,000 words into it, and I'm thinking, I still don't know where it's going. I still don't know all the people's going to die. I don't know how it's going to end. But man, this is fun. So since then, I just started, and maybe I'll have a half a dozen scenes in mind when I start a book. They may or may not stay there at the end, but I just start writing, see what happens.
Or like maybe the idea of tent pole setup, like like a general idea, and you just kind of work around it, or you just kind of just dive.
Not even that. Not even that. I just have a few scenes that I think could be fun to write, and then
I feel like kind of the same way. Like I will start to outline because I like the idea of outlining, but then I get halfway through the outline, I'm already like, hell, I already know it's going. And then once I finish the outline, I'm like, now I know how it ends, and I don't care anymore. So it's.
And as I'm writing this, and like I said, I'm not sure where it's going until maybe 25, 30,000 words into it, I figure out what the midpoint's going to be. And to me, the midpoint is the key to every story. That's the pivot, that's the turn, that's the change. Something happens to spin the protagonist and the story in a different direction. And so it's really like two stories. There's the first story where he's passive and being affected by what's going on. And there's the second half after this midpoint revelation, whatever it is, that now they're active and they're actually trying to solve the problem on their own wits. So the midpoint of the story to me is the key. And that'll come to me sometime in there. I may be 15,000 words away from it, but I say, now I know what has to happen to spin this story down the slope. And once I spin it, then bang, you're off and running.
Also, like you just talked about, you've done so much with ITW, with Thriller Fest. I believe you helped start Craft Fest and Outliers. Nick and I both kind of write suspense or thrillers, and so suspense is always a big thing in thrillers, we think. And so when people ask about what techniques do you use to create suspense and how do you keep it going, and there's different kinds of suspense that go into everything. You get some I'm very heavy action in my books. Nick's sort of, like he said, he's got diving suspense. So sometimes he's underwater, everything's a little slower. So how do you approach that? Or what would you tell your students as when they ask, how do you approach adding better suspense or more realistic suspense into my books?
True suspense comes from anticipation, not from the actual event. The actual event is a lot of stuff going on, and you got to know it and follow it. But the anticipation of that event is where the suspense is. It's like, something bad is going to happen if your character tries to break into this house to find something. That house is not going to be empty for long, and somebody's going to come along and the whole thing's going to change. But it's that anticipation. I think Alfred Hitchcock was probably the best ever at that, because he set up very suspenseful things. But when a push came to shove, his events, none of them really ever happened. We never saw Janet Leigh get stabbed, but we saw the suspense that we knew. She's vulnerable. She's nude. She's in the shower. And here comes somebody with a huge knife. But he never showed her being stabbed. And so he avoided the event, but he built the suspense.
And like Birds, that's another one. I always thought that how he did Birds, like, he turned what is normal, everyday things into a suspense is always fascinating to me. Like, it's just, who's normally scared of birds? I mean...
Well, I remember the scene where she left the school and suddenly these birds start collecting on the jungle gyms and on the wires and stuff, and I defy anybody to say, whoa, what the hell is going on? It's like, where we play golf, we have a lot of coyotes. And if you see one coyote, fine. But the other day we were out there playing and 4 of them came out. And I'm thinking, this could go badly. One coyote I can take care of.
They just wanted to play through. That was all.
They were
a foursome. Yeah, they wanted to play through.
They're like, you're taking too long. Can we just come on past? So.
Yeah, right.
You're looking at the other 3 in your group thinking, which one am I going to hit with the club and leave him for the coyotes while I run away?
No. I just got to be faster than them.
So also in like talk about like the suspense, there's also the big thing with especially thrillers nowadays is these plot twists. And I don't rely a whole lot on plot twists because mine are just heavy. We just blow everything up and kill everybody to the end. But what's the technique for like making my worry about doing a plot twist is it's either going to be very obvious from the get-go, and like I said, we were watching old M. Night Shyamalan is known for trying to do a plot twist at the end, and I'm already I'm already at this point going, what is this going to be? Trying to anticipate it. So what's a good way to actually perform a proper plot twist so that it doesn't come off as contrived or trite?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? It's very difficult.
Hold on, I gotta take notes.
Yeah, and you can twist yourself into a corner, and you can also twist yourself into something stupid. I remember when I read Shutter Island, and I love Dennis Lane. He's one of my favorite. And I remember when I got to the end of that, I said, "Dennis, you cheating son of a bitch." And then I stopped and I said, "Dennis, you're brilliant. You got me. You got me." But you got to be careful with that stuff. And that's why I think that that's more than the twisty-turny thing. I go back to the midpoint. It's the revelation. It's the event. It's the thing that happens, or the understanding of something that has previously happened, and you look at it in a different light, that changes the character and the story. To me, that's what creates a story that people will finish, that they will get there and then they will go down. You can get, I read stories all the time. I see, especially TV shows and stuff, where the plot twist, you said, no, that's way too convenient. You had this happen just so that could happen, but it organically didn't come out of what happened before. But that's storytelling, and that's why we, drink. That's why Hemingway shot himself.
Someone told him his plot twist was obvious.
Yeah,
that was it.
All writers drink,
I think that Stephen King says that, of course I drink. I'm a writer.
Exactly. I mean, you go to any writing conference, where does everybody hang out? The bar.
That's true enough. That's very true. Yeah. So it's interesting because it's balance again, right? All these things are a balance. I mean, you've got to dangle something in front of the reader that is drawing their attention away from what you're going to twist them towards. But I try and put some twists in some of my books, depending on what the storyline is. And I've had some decent ones. And my first line of defense is my wife. So when she's reading through as we go, if I can get I didn't see that coming out of her, I know I'm in the ballpark. Because some people will figure it out, right? If you have 100 people watch a show or read a book, there's a few of them that are going to accidentally guess correctly. And the thing that really bothers me is when it does come out of left field with no breadcrumbs, with no connection, when just this new character walks on and it's like, how are we supposed to know that? I have to have something to connect back to and go, oh, that's right, this. Then it makes sense. It's nothing bothers me more than if it just comes out of left field,
And sometimes you get that in your writing and you get, 3/4 of the way through the book and you realize this isn't making sense. But if I go back to chapter 4 and I do this one little thing,
drop
now
the nugget.
It echoes. Now it makes sense. Things like that. I remember I had a professor once in medical school who he said, you can understand all the physics of sound production and string vibration and harmonics and all of this stuff, choruses and chords, and you can understand all that stuff, but to play the piano, you got to play the piano. And obviously he was talking about medicine. You can understand all the science and all the stuff and all the lab results and all of this, but at the end of the day, to practice medicine, you got to practice medicine. And he was making that analogy. And I think it's true. They asked Benny Goodman, what makes good music? And he said, it ain't much to do with the notes. And so you can understand all these techniques of writing, but at the end of the day, you want to tell a story. And so just tell the damn story.
Yeah, it's a little bit like jazz. Somebody I'd heard recently refer to like writing is a little bit like jazz because jazz is so improvisational. I mean, when we're writing, there are people who, even when you're plotting, if you're a heavy plotter, you're still improvising a story from the get-go. So, I think that's a little bit of it, being able to know how the story flows and where it goes from there.
Yeah, are you a storyteller? And I think that's it. It's like, we did a thing. I did one with Tim Malini, a class on putting humor in your stories. And, so I asked him, I said, do you have to be funny to write humor? And he said, yes. And that's the answer. If you're not funny, you can't write humor.
That's so
it's
true.
As simple as that. And so if you can't tell a story, you better go do something else.
What if I think I'm funny, but my wife doesn't?
Well, that's universal. Your cat doesn't think you're funny either.
It's universal.
My cat has zero taste. I won't say that about my wife because she married me, but I'm pretty sure I'm funny.
I just took that, by the way, as meaning it's universal. Nobody thinks you're funny.
That was universal relationship advice.
We're also going to run a relationship podcast after this.
Exactly.
What not to do.
What not to. So speaking of relationships, let's kind of just antagonist. That's another thing that like coming up with a solid good antagonist. A lot like dialogue to me is so much fun to create a really good bad guy. What makes the best bad guy in Europe or the best antagonist? I mean, they're not always bad guys per se, but
Well, someone who's clever and equal, that is not just wimpy and can be run over, because you can't have that. It's got to be someone who has an agenda and who knows how to follow and perform that agenda. Remember, the antagonist is the hero of their own story, and they have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they have fears, and they have wants, and they have needs, and they have skills, just like the protagonist. So you've got to spend time on that. They did a survey, and the greatest antagonist ever always wins is Hannibal Lecter. And why? Because he's skilled, he's smart, he's clever, he's tricky, he's also brilliant. He is a gourmand. He is a music aficionado. He's an art aficionado. He carries himself very stately and properly, and, would be in polite company even before the king, and that kind of stuff. And that's what made him deep and broad. And that's why you would love to sit down and talk to this guy as long as you weren't on the menu, because he has so many admirable qualities and social graces, but yet he has this little problem, and so it's what made him a great antagonist,
So a question we ask to everybody that comes on the show here, which you've answered in little bits and pieces, but we'll put you on the spot to name one. What's your author's superpower?
Well, as I said, if you're looking at crafty things, it's dialogue. That's my magic bullet. I can always go to dialogue and tell a story. But I think it's just perseverance. It's just keep doing it and loving the process. I tell people, if people want to go to medical school because they want a big house and drive a Mercedes, well, that's all well and good. But are you in love with the process? Are you going to be able to sit down and do the work to get there, and then do the work after you get there? And after you get there, is this the work you want to do? Because often you get there and say, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. This is too hard. I don't like being up all weekend and running around in the emergency rooms in the middle of the night. I don't like this. Well, too bad. Too late now. For writers, I think you have to like the process. If you don't like sitting down by yourself, putting words on a page, go do something else, because I don't care how good you are. I don't care if you can write off a first draft and it's perfect, or you have to go through 20 rewrites. If you don't like sitting and putting words on a page, you will walk away. So just go ahead and walk away now and save yourself some trouble. But if you enjoy that process, don't give up. Keep going. Keep going, because you will get better and better and better and better.
All right. So last question that we have for you.
We have a fancy wheel of questions.
Uh-oh, Mayday.
So it's a random question.
Okay.
And so...
High production value here.
Yes.
My wheel broke last couple weeks ago.
You got a huge budget.
Yeah, exactly.
You got a Hollywood budget, don't you?
I think it's a porn budget is what we're working off of.
Exactly.
It's definitely the back streets of Hollywood budget.
It's like it's an OnlyFans.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's an OnlyFans budget is what we're working on.
Exactly.
Oh, speaking of OnlyFans, no, I'm just kidding. What show are you currently binging or are you enjoying right now?
Oh, Landman, which is unbelievable. And then I just caught up with Tulsa King. This is the second season, but with Stallone, and it is so good, and they're so over the top. But to me, probably the greatest series ever put on television was Justified.
I was just thinking that. Justified
because
is by far.
I'm a huge Elmore Leonard fan anyway. I've reread his books 3 or 4 times each, because they're all textbooks on how to tell a story and how to write. But Justified was like Elmore wrote all the dialogue. I mean,
the dialogue in Justified is some of the best dialogue
it's phenomenal,
on TV ever. So it is
The
by
Diplomat's
far.
a good series that I've been watching. That's just hysterical. Kerry Russell is so good in that character. But I think right now, Landman is just, I mean, it is just so gritty and over the top.
This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. Is the school that everybody should drop in and check out. We'll put links in the show notes to your stuff, Doug, so people can find you. And thanks so much. We hope to run into you in person at one of these conventions.
Yeah, well, I'd love that. And thank you for asking me to be here. I'll come back anytime you guys want. You guys are a hoot and a half.
Thank you, Doug. That was awesome. He was fun.
You can see why he teaches, and he would be incredibly good at that. So really interesting. I haven't dropped in on the Outliers thing. I got to take a look and see it. The names lined up with that is good. And the stuff we touched on a lot of things about craft. It's always tricky when you ask one, okay, define suspense in a short sentence. Go ahead. And he did a really good job of dropping that in and talking about balancing it, right? So there's always a balance.
Well, and making sure that you're giving the reader what they want and delivering what the story needs at the same time. And that's always a trick, whether it's dialogue, whether it's suspense, whether it's plot twist, whether it's your antagonist. I mean, like we covered all of this with him. And I can imagine, like, if we got into one of his courses, it would be, phenomenal in what he'd be teaching us. But I think it's important to know, like, you can't have all of one thing or the other. You can't have a completely just bad guy who's despicable, because there's got to be a little bit of value to him.
When we write, we always question ourselves, right? I mean, I'm sure some people don't, but I think most people do. It's just you're like, okay, did I make this enough of this? Is there enough of that? And especially when you listen to crafty things, you start referencing your own work and go, okay, well, did I really apply that or apply that? I think, and it's pretty tricky because it's not like we're making widgets where there's a set of rules and defined dimensions that it has to be and you get to check it and everything else, right? It's all squidgy. It's all soft. Is your antagonist good enough? Is your protagonist likable enough? Is there all these things? So I think with all this craft stuff, you have to absorb it, right? It has to be, it's like you've got to tell yourself 7 times so it goes into your memory or whatever it might be. So it's there. It's just living in your subconscious as you're doing the writing, because it's really hard to, otherwise it's very easy, I think, to, especially when you're starting out, is to chase this stuff around. You listen to something like, Doug and his great information that he just laid down in there. So you start diving off in one direction and making sure you do this, and then you listen to another show, and there's something else, and you jump back and forth, and it can end up being paralyzing. But the key is to absorb it all and put it into practice over time, right? I'm going to give a shout out to a friend of ours, and I've been listening actually to the audiobook, which is really well read. But Kyla Stone, who's a friend of ours and been a guest on the show, and she's a fantastic writer. And I've finally got around to, I've been listening to Edge of Collapse and the first one. You talk, oh my God, talk about holding tension and then releasing you from the tension in little breaks, because you need that. You need a breather. And then bringing it back on, because then when you bring back on the tension again, it takes your breath away again, right? So she did just a marvelous job of doing that. So that's a good one to read. Anyone that wants it, it's just an entertaining read anyway. All right, show notes for the guest links. We'll put the stuff in there to DP Lyle's info is Outliers Writing University, so you can look that up.
Totally check that out. I think there are reasonable. I was looking at this morning. There are reasonable. Of course, we're recording this before Christmas, and this will be coming out after, but there are some reasonable prices on it, monthly prices, as well as you could pay for the whole year. And it's an investment, but if you're really interested, looking at some of the classes, I was like, wow, I may have to pony up some money and learn to be an actual writer. So
yeah. Bit late now.
Yeah, it's a bit late now. It's never too late. You can always improve.
Never too late.
But they were very affordable, I thought. If you're looking to, people spend money on lots of things, and if you're looking to be a better writer, then working on your craft is important.
All right, so we'll leave in the show notes. New episodes every 2 weeks. Until next time, be cool to each other.
Fair winds and following seas.
You've been listening to the Two Authors podcast with Nicholas Harvey and Douglas Pratt. Subscribe on your favorite platform for alerts on new shows coming every 2 weeks.